There's a sentence someone said to you years ago that you can still recite word for word, in their exact tone, on a day whose actual date you've long since lost. You can't remember what you wore last Tuesday, but you remember the way their voice dipped when they said it. This is not a flaw in your memory, it's a feature of it. Somewhere inside you, there is a quiet archivist who never clocks out, who files away every slight, every dismissive glance, every joke that landed like a slap dressed up as humor. And while the rest of your memories fade like photographs left in the sun, these ones stay sharp. Untouched by time, almost preserved on purpose. You've probably wondered at some point why you can't just let things go the way other people seem to. Why an offhand comment from a stranger at a party in 2019 still surfaces uninvited while you're brushing your teeth. Why you can forgive someone out loud and still feel the wound humming quietly underneath, like a string that was plucked once and never stopped vibrating. That hum is not bitterness. It's not you failing to heal. It's your nervous system doing exactly what it was built to do. There's a term for this: negativity bias, and it sounds clinical until you understand what it actually means. Your brain, across thousands of years of evolution, learned that threats matter more than comforts. A compliment forgotten costs you nothing. An insult forgotten could cost you your place in the tribe, your safety, your belonging. So your mind, without asking your permission, decided long ago that pain deserves a permanent address while pleasure gets to rent. This is why 100 kind words can slide past you like water, and one cruel word can lodge itself like a splinter under skin. Not because you're ungrateful for kindness, because your brain was never designed to protect you from kindness. It was designed to protect you from harm. And insults to a brain like yours register as harm. There's a particular kind of person who remembers every insult with startling, almost cinematic clarity, the exact words, the exact room, the exact way the air felt different afterward. People sometimes mistake this for grudge holding, for being too sensitive, for not moving on. But what's actually happening underneath is far more intricate than spite. It's not resentment, it's pattern recognition. Somewhere in your history, being caught off guard cost you something. Maybe it was respect, maybe it was safety. Maybe it was simply the unbearable feeling of being humiliated in front of people whose opinion mattered too much to you at the time. And your mind, ever the devoted student of your pain, decided that the way to prevent that feeling from ever blindsiding you again was to study it, to replay it, to turn it over and over until every edge of it was memorized. This is hypervigilance wearing the costume of memory. It feels like obsession, it's actually defense. You are not weak for remembering, you are alert. There's a quiet irony in this, though one worth sitting with. The same sharpness that lets you recall every insult with perfect clarity is often the same sharpness that makes you painfully fair to others, because you know intimately what it costs to be on the receiving end of carelessness. People who remember every wound are rarely the ones who casually inflict them. They've felt the weight of words too long to throw them around lightly. So when you find yourself replaying an old insult at 1 a.m., while everyone else in the house sleeps peacefully, understand this isn't pathology. It's a kind of devotion to fairness, to dignity, to the version of yourself that refuses to be blindsided twice by the same blade. But devotion has a cost. And it's worth naming honestly, without romanticizing it into something it isn't. There's a concept in psychology called rumination, the act of replaying a painful event again and again, not to solve it, but simply because the mind hasn't finished metabolizing it. Rumination feels productive while you're inside it. It feels like vigilance, like preparation, like control. But often it's the opposite of control. It's a loop with no exit ramp, a record stuck on the same scratch, playing the same 4 seconds of sound until the meaning blurs and all that's left is the ache. You know this loop, maybe you're inside it right now even as you watch this. The insult plays, your stomach tightens the exact same way it did the first time, your jaw sets, hours pass and somehow you're still composing the comeback you never said. Here's a quiet question worth asking yourself, not for anyone else, just for you. Who are you actually protecting when you replay it for the 100th time, the version of you that got hurt, or the part of you that's afraid of being hurt like that again? There's no wrong answer, but the question itself tends to crack something open. For some people, this pattern runs even deeper, rooted not in a single sharp memory, but in something closer to a felt sense. The quiet, almost wordless feeling that they have always had to keep score because no one else was keeping it fairly for them. This is where attachment theory enters the conversation, not as jargon, but as a kind of map of the heart's early education. If growing up your feelings were dismissed, minimized, mocked, or simply unseen, if "you're too sensitive" became a refrain you heard more often than "I'm sorry," your nervous system may have learned a devastating lesson disguised as wisdom. Nobody else will protect your dignity, so you'd better remember every threat to it yourself. This isn't insecurity in the way people use the word casually. It's an attachment wound, a quiet vow made by a much younger version of you who had no other tools. That child grew into the adult who can recall with photographic precision an insult from a coworker 7 years ago, not because that adult is fragile, because that child never got to put the burden down and nobody ever told them it was safe to. This is not weakness. It's memory standing guard at a door that once had no lock. And there's something tender in that, isn't there? Something that deserves softness rather than judgment, including the judgment you might quietly aim at yourself for still caring about something that shouldn't matter anymore. It matters because it once protected you, not because it's irrational now. There's another layer worth turning toward gently, and that's the idea of locus of control, essentially, the belief about where power over your life actually sits. Some people carry what's called an external locus of control, where the events of their life feel like things that happen to them, decided by other people's words and moods and whims. For someone with this orientation, an insult isn't just a passing comment. It's evidence. It's data that gets filed into a growing case about how the world treats them, how little say they have in their own worth. But other people carry every insult for a very different reason, not because they feel powerless, but because they're quietly trying to reclaim power after the fact. By replaying the moment, by analyzing every word, by imagining sharper responses they never got to give in real time, they are not stuck in the past. They are trying in the only way available to them to rewrite an ending that felt unjust. This isn't dwelling. It's an attempt at authorship, not surrender, reclamation. You might recognize yourself in one of these or in both, depending on the day, depending on the wound. Most people are not one fixed psychological type. Most people are a shifting weather system, sometimes anxious, sometimes resilient, sometimes simply tired of feeling so much about things that on paper shouldn't weigh this much. There's also something deeply human in how insults specifically, more than almost any other kind of pain, seem to lodge themselves so permanently. Compliments are pleasant, but pleasant doesn't demand explanation. An insult, though, creates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable tension between two conflicting beliefs, in this case, I am worthy and someone just treated me as though I'm not. Your mind hates holding two contradictory truths at once. It will do almost anything to resolve that tension, including replaying the insult relentlessly, searching for the missing piece that would make sense of it, make it fair, make it stop hurting in this particular unresolved way. This is why a single comment from someone who barely matters to you can occupy more mental real estate than it has any right to. It's not really about them. It's about the gap between who you know yourself to be and the version of you that was just, however briefly, made to feel small. And here's where the emotional core of all this quietly settles. People who remember every insult are often people who, somewhere along the way, learned that their worth was negotiable in other people's mouths. So they hold on to the proof, every cutting word, every dismissive laugh, almost like evidence to defend themselves with later. Even if later never actually arrives, even if the only courtroom is the inside of their own mind at 2 a.m. It's exhausting carrying a courtroom inside you, but it's also in its own strange way sacred because it means some part of you never stopped believing you deserve to be defended, even when no one else showed up to do it. There's a softer truth hiding underneath the sharp one, and it's this. The people who remember every insult are very often the same people who remember every kindness too, just quieter, just less loudly, because kindness doesn't ache the same way and so it doesn't demand to be replayed. They notice everything. They carry worlds within them, entire timelines of who hurt them and who didn't, who showed up and who flinched. Who made them feel small in a hallway in 2014 and who once said something so gentle it became a small flame they still warm their hands on years later without anyone knowing. This isn't oversensitivity. It's depth wearing a disguise that looks, from the outside, like grudge holding. Maybe you've felt this, the strange loneliness of being someone who notices too much, in a world that often rewards people for noticing too little. Of holding on to something that everyone around you seems to have forgotten, and wondering quietly if something is wrong with you for still feeling its weight. Nothing is wrong with you. You simply have a longer memory for harm than the world has patience for. There's a quiet, almost paradoxical relief available here if you let yourself reach for it. You don't have to stop remembering in order to stop suffering. The insult can stay in the archive, filed, dated, understood, without being summoned every single night to perform the same painful scene on repeat. The goal isn't amnesia. Amnesia was never the cure, and pretending it was just adds another failure to the pile, another thing to feel inadequate about when the forgetting doesn't come. The actual shift, the one that quietly changes everything, is in what the memory is allowed to mean. An insult remembered as proof of your unworthiness will keep aching indefinitely, because it's being asked to answer a question it was never built to answer, am I enough? An insult remembered instead as information about someone else's limitations, their own unhealed places, their own careless hour, that same memory starts to lose its grip. Not because the words change, because the meaning underneath them does. This is not the same as forgiving them for your sake or for theirs. It's something quieter than forgiveness, less performative. It's simply refusing to let someone else's worst 5 seconds define your understanding of your own worth for the next 5 years. Not forgetting, reframing. There's also something worth saying about the people who delivered those insults in the first place, not to excuse them, but to understand the architecture of cruelty a little better. Most insults that lodge themselves so deeply in memory were never really about you. They were about someone else's bad day weaponized into your bad decade, someone else's insecurity dressed up as your inadequacy. People who are at peace with themselves rarely reach for cruelty as a tool. Cruelty tends to be the language of people who are, in some unspoken way, also hurting, also afraid, also trying to feel a little bigger by making someone else feel smaller. This doesn't make the insult acceptable. It simply makes it less personal than it felt in the moment it landed. And here's a question worth sitting with quietly, not to answer out loud. Just to feel the shape of in your own chest. If you could see the insult that haunts you most not as a verdict on your worth, but as a glimpse into someone else's unhealed wound, would it still feel as heavy as it does right now? For some people, the answer changes everything. For others, the weight remains, and that's allowed too. Healing isn't a straight line that rewards you for reaching the right answer fastest. There's a kind of grief tangled up in all of this that doesn't get spoken about enough. The grief of wishing you could be the kind of person who simply lets things go, who hears a careless comment and feels it dissolve by morning like dew. You watch other people do this, seemingly without effort, and you wonder what's different about your wiring, what door you got left open that should have closed. But maybe the door isn't broken. Maybe it's just a door that learned, early and painfully, that closing too quickly was once dangerous. A door that stays a little open because somewhere, long ago, staying alert was the only thing that kept you safe in a room where safety wasn't guaranteed. Not stuck, not weak. Just shaped by what it had to survive. There's a strange comfort, too, in realizing that the very intensity that makes you replay old wounds is the same intensity that lets you love deeply, notice beauty in small, unremarkable moments. Remember the exact way someone said, "I'm proud of you," once years ago in a tone that still steadies you on hard days. The nervous system that holds onto pain this tightly is the same nervous system that holds onto love this tightly. You don't get the depth without the weight. They share the same root system. So when you find yourself late at night replaying an old insult with unsettling clarity, perhaps the kindest thing you can offer yourself isn't the demand to stop. Perhaps it's simply the quiet acknowledgement, this hurt. Once, and the part of me that remembers is the same part of me that has always tried to keep me safe even when its methods are tiring, even when its timing is inconvenient. Even when the insult is years old, and the person who said it has long since moved on with their life, unaware they ever left a mark at all. There is something almost unbearably human about that, being wounded by someone who never thinks of you again, while you carry the echo of their carelessness for years. Not because you're obsessed with them. Because the moment itself revealed something about how fragile your sense of safety in the world has always quietly been. And maybe that's the real work underneath all the analyzing and naming and understanding. Not to forget the insults, not to force a forgiveness you don't feel, but to slowly build a sense of worth, so steady, so rooted, that the next careless comment someone throws your way lands on solid ground instead of an open wound. Not because the words won't sting at all. Words that land on purpose still sting, even for the most healed among us. But because the sting no longer threatens to define you. This is not emptiness where the old hurt used to live. It's room for something quieter to grow there instead. There's a hum that exists in certain quiet rooms late at night, when the house is asleep and your mind finally has space to wander toward whatever it's been avoiding all day. For people who remember every insult, that hum often carries old voices, replayed words, unfinished arguments with people who never even knew they were being argued with. It can feel like haunting. But it can also slowly, with enough gentleness toward yourself, become something else, not a haunting but a homecoming. A return to the parts of you that were hurt and never properly tended to, finally being met instead of silenced. You don't owe anyone, including yourself, a tidy ending to this. You don't have to forgive on a schedule, release on command, or arrive at peace by a deadline someone else has decided is reasonable. Some wounds take longer to soften than others, and that's not a personal failing. It's simply how depth works. The same depth that lets you remember every insult is the depth that, eventually, given enough patience, lets you remember your own resilience just as vividly. Maybe somewhere along the way, the archivist inside you will learn a new habit, not to forget the pain, but to file it differently. Not as evidence against your worth, but as a record of everything you survived and quietly carried alone in rooms no one else ever saw. And maybe, on some ordinary evening that looks just like every other evening, you'll notice that an old insult surfaces in your mind the way it always has, with the same words, the same voice. But this time, it doesn't ask anything of you. It simply passes through, like weather that no longer has the power to change the temperature of the room you've built inside yourself.